Imagine heading into a 10-day spiritual retreat,
Right.
right? You were probably looking for a little peace, maybe some quiet self-discovery.
Yeah, that's usually the goal.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But by day 3, instead of finding your inner zen, you are physically vomiting in sheer terror.
Oh, wow.
Right. And why? Because you've just experienced this sudden, visceral realization that you have absolutely zero control over your own mind. That you, essentially, are not the one driving your life.
That is an incredibly intense starting point.
It really is. And that is exactly where our deep dive starts today.
And it perfectly sets the stage for the massive, sprawling worldview we are exploring with you today. We're looking at a YouTube interview, specifically episode 37, from a series called Let's Discover God Together.
Yeah, and the guest is a man named Ted Garrison.
Right, and Garrison's journey takes him from that terrifying spiritual retreat all the way to converting to Islam later in life.
And his philosophy, it doesn't just stop at personal theology. Garrison weaves together the Big Bang, a New Age framework called the human design system, sociological theories on why humans go to war, and even apocalyptic prophecies for the year 2027.
He really tries to connect the internal landscape of the human brain directly to global geopolitics.
He does. But before we get too deep into the weeds, we need to set some ground rules.
Yes, absolutely. Because his synthesis touches down on some heavily charged real-world issues, specifically regarding Israel, Palestine, and Western capitalism, we need a quick ground rule before we bring you further into his framework.
Right.
Our only job today is to break down Garrison's arguments and map his unique perspective exactly as he presents it in the source material. We are acting as impartial guides to his theory. We are not taking sides, and we are not here to endorse or validate the complex religious and political stances he brings up.
Okay, let's unpack this. Going back to that retreat in 1996 or 1997, Garrison is there to study the human design system. Before we get into his physical reaction, what exactly is he studying?
Well, for those who might not be familiar with it, the human design system is essentially a new age synthesis created in the late 1980s.
Okay.
It basically combines elements of Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, Hindu chakras, and Kabbalah to, map out human personality and decision making.
Got it. And Garrison was deep into learning this system when he had what he describes as an emergent experience.
Right, and this is where the vomiting comes in. He describes the shock of his mind essentially being knocked from the driver's seat into the back seat.
He suddenly realized that choice, at least in the way we typically conceive of it as something we consciously generate and control, is an illusion.
Yeah, he realized the mind is meant to be a passenger. It is supposed to sit in the back, look out the window, observe the scenery, and, study the world.
But it is emphatically not supposed to be steering the vehicle.
Exactly.
It's sort of like waking up and realizing you are in a self-driving car that you totally thought you were manually steering.
That's a great way to put it.
But this brings up a huge tension for me. If I am not driving the car and my mind is just a passenger, how can Garrison possibly hold people accountable for their actions?
That is the big question.
I mean, he talks a lot about human tyranny. How can someone be a tyrant if they aren't the one making the choices?
What's fascinating here is Garrison actually resolves that tension through a concept that eventually drew him to Islam decades later.
Oh, real?
Yeah, he points to the Islamic concept of humans as vice-vigents. In this framework, a vice-vigent is essentially an agent or a learner sent to figure out the physical world.
Okay, so a learner.
Right. Garrison argues that God or Allah is the one actually making the choices.
Yep.
God initiates the action and then essentially turns to you, the passenger, and asks, what do you think about that?
So the accountability doesn't lie in the initial action itself, but in how we reflect on it.
Precisely. The responsibility lies entirely in your role as a learner. Do you look at a choice that led to pain and suffering, observe it, and learn from it? Or do you, as he phrases it, stubbornly defend your misery?
Oh, wow. Defend your misery.
Yeah. Tyranny arises when the passenger mind refuses to learn, tries to violently grab the steering wheel, and becomes addicted to his own desires.
And Garrison is incredibly specific about the linguistic terminology we use when talking about this internal struggle. Like often we hear people blame their ego for their bad decisions, right?
Yeah. Right, but Garrison makes a strict correction there based on his framework.
Yeah, this is a crucial distinction.
In his synthesis of human design in Islam, the word ego actually referred specifically to the function of the heart.
Huh. The heart.
Yes. For Garrison, the heart is the core of your true self, and it represents the very meaning of Islam's submission and peace. So the ego is never the source of the human problem.
So what is the source of the problem then?
What he calls the not self, and the not self originates entirely in the mind. It is the mind generating a negative, defensive way of thinking about who you really are.
Gotcha.
Garrison notes that when people use the term ego negatively, it is almost an indirect way of putting down Islam. The mind, the not self, is the tyrant, not the ego.
That reframing of the mind as a defensive panic tyrant perfectly explains his view of God too. He describes God as knowably unknowable.
Which requires profound humility.
Exactly. The moment your mind thinks it has perfectly defined God, you stop being a learner in the back seat. You're trying to steer the car again.
Right.
But if the mind, this not self, is naturally so defensive, how does that defensiveness actually manifest in the real world?
Yeah.
Like, why do we constantly end up in conflict?
Well, to explain the mechanics of human conflict, Garrison brings in the work of the anthropologist René Girard,
Right.
specifically his theory of mimetic desire. Girard proposed that human beings don't actually desire things intrinsically. Instead, we copy the desires of others.
Oh, so we want things simply because we see other people wanting them.
Exactly. Animals might fight over a piece of meat or territory out of strict biological caloric necessity, but humans go to war over copied, abstract desires.
Garrison uses a brilliant analogy to explain this. Imagine two kids in a room, right? One kid is playing with a plastic toy, gets bored, and puts it down. The second kid walks over and picks it up. Suddenly, the first kid rushes back, and they are in a full-blown physical war over this toy.
Over a piece of plastic.
Exactly. Garrison points out the underlying reality. The fight has absolutely nothing to do with the toy. The toy is basically worthless.
The fight is entirely about the shared desire for the object. The fact that the other person wants it is what gives the object its perceived ultimate value.
And this is where Garrison maps Girard's mimetic theory directly onto global geopolitics, specifically the Middle East.
Right. But he is very careful to draw a strict boundary around how far this toy analogy goes.
Yeah, this is important.
According to Garrison, the specific toy being fought over in this mimetic framework should really be limited to Jerusalem itself. They are fighting over Jerusalem.
Okay, but we need to capture his next point accurately because he makes a really sharp distinction.
He does.
He argues that while Jerusalem might be the mimetic toy, the actual violence and profound systemic injustice is the Zionist settlement expanding over the entire land of Palestine.
Yes. He is adamant about not minimizing the reality of the geopolitical situation. He doesn't want this perceived as just two kids scrabbling over a plastic block.
Right.
In his view, the tyranny lies in the broader settlement and oppression, and he explicitly identifies a collusion between Zionist factions and what he calls a false bond with the evangelical Christian right.
He views that as the tyrannical entity driving this systemic injustice.
Exactly. And again, keeping our neutral stance here with you, our listener, we are exploring Garrison's specific framing.
Just reporting what's in the text.
Right. And he goes on to argue that when you have this level of systemic oppression, violent reactions are inevitable.
Yeah, when asked about Islamic terrorism, he frames it not as an inherent religious trait, but as a desperate human reaction to a prison environment.
If you confine and oppress people long enough, violent breakouts are the tragic, expected result of that tyranny.
All of this really ties back to his definition of idolatry.
Oh, definitely.
In Garrison's synthesis, idolatry isn't just, bowing down to an ancient wooden statue. Idolatry is taking any bottomless human desire and assigning it ultimate meaning.
It is the belief that if your mind can just acquire this specific thing, your deep internal void will finally be filled.
He lists things like greenbacks, furniture, and even bitcoins.
Bitcoins.
Right. It's the illusion that your desires are a tunnel with a light at the end. You tell yourself, if I just get enough Bitcoin or if my faction controls this specific piece of land, I'll be completely fulfilled.
But the tunnel just gets darker.
Because you've turned the Bitcoin or the land into an idol. And because a piece of digital currency or a plot of dirt can never actually substitute for the infinite mystery of God, it just leads to addiction.
And eventually to mimetic violence. You end up fighting to the death over a toy, entirely convinced that the toy holds the meaning of the universe.
It's wild. So if the human mind is this much of a disaster, constantly generating the not-self, building idols, dragging us into mimetic wars, how on earth do we fix it?
Garrison points to the historical prophets for that. But his take on theology, especially his interpretation of Jesus, is highly unorthodox.
First off, he completely throws out the traditional Christian dogma of original sin.
Right. Ontological evil, the idea that humans are born fundamentally broken or dirty, makes no sense in his framework.
He argues logically that if humans were inherently bad at a structural level, God wouldn't even bother trying to save us. There would be nothing pure to salvage.
This goes back to what we discussed earlier about the ego versus the not self. He separates our experience into the mind, which creates the tyrannical not self, and the heart, which is the true self.
And he uses this striking biological metaphor to explain how the true self operates. He compares it to your liver.
It is a very grounding way to look at spirituality.
I found it so fascinating. Think about how your liver actually works. You don't have to consciously command your liver to filter toxins out of your blood.
No, you don't sit there meditating, telling your cells to process waste.
It just does it automatically in the background. Garrison says your true self, your heart functions the exact same way.
It is completely innocent, and its only job is to process the emotional and spiritual crap of the world and keep you healthy.
It inherently filters out the mimetic noise.
Right. The problem only starts when the conscious mind steps in and tries to micromanage a system that was already working perfectly.
This raises an important question, though. If our core is already this innocent, perfectly functioning filter, what was the purpose of a figure like Jesus?
Well, Garrison synthesizes several traditions here, drawing on the Hindu concept of the self and blending it with Islamic submission.
And he concludes that the crucifixion of Jesus was a useless sacrifice.
Useless, but not without profound purpose.
Exactly. By useless, he means Jesus was not a necessary blood payment demanded by a wrathful God to balance some ledger of original sin.
Instead, Jesus functioned as a mirror. He willingly allowed himself to be crushed by the machinery of human mimetic violence to force humanity to look at itself.
He stepped into the role of the innocent scapegoat to say, look at what your mind's addiction to idols makes you do.
He died to expose the broken, violent systems we build, hoping that the shock of it would make our minds finally sit back in the passenger seat and let the true self take over.
So we have this unified theory. The heart is pure, but the mind acts as a tyrant that builds oppressive, sacrificial systems. The prophets continually arrive to remind us to stop worshiping our own minds.
But this leads to a massive practical problem. How do we actually organize a society in the physical world if our minds are constantly prone to this tyranny?
And this is where Garrison believes Islam steps in as the ultimate physical and practical solution. But his reading of Islam is very heavily focused on economics.
Garrison views Islam as the most accepting of all frameworks, but with a strict caveat, it absolutely demands economic justice.
Right.
In his interpretation, the Islamic framework doesn't force you to adopt a specific internal theology. You can maintain your own faith, but it will absolutely not tolerate an unjust financial system that oppresses the core.
This dramatically reframes his definition of jihad, which is a term that carries a lot of linguistic baggage in the West.
It certainly does.
Garrison strips away the concept of forced religious conversion entirely. For him, jihad is the physical act of putting your body on the line against systemic tyranny.
Because we are God's vicegerents, his learners on earth, we do not get a free pass to sit back and watch injustice happen.
Exactly. If water rights are being stolen or babies are being harmed, passivity is a failure of your role. You have to physically resist the idolatry of oppressive systems.
And Garrison believes those overarching oppressive systems, which he primarily identifies as Western capitalist, top-down hierarchies, are running out of time.
This is where it gets kind of crazy. He maps out an apocalyptic timeline, and he places the definitive end date at January 2027.
That is right around the corner.
It really is. But where does he even get 2027 from? This seems like a massive leap from theology to doomsday prepping.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It is quite a leap. He arrives at this date by synthesizing the human design system's cyclical calendars with the prophecies of Edgar Cayce.
Wait, Edgar Cayce?
Yeah. Cayce was an early 20th century American clairvoyant, often called the sleeping prophet, who gave thousands of readings on future events.
All right.
Drawing on these sources, Garrison argues that humanity is at the end of a 400-year cycle. By January 2027, he predicts the breakdown of the United States as a functional idea.
Wow.
The collapse of top-down state hierarchies and the total failure of Western fiat money.
I'm struggling to see how a society functions post-2027 if central banks and state governments simply evaporate. Did Garrison just expect us to wander a Mad Max wasteland fighting over canned goods?
Far from it. He actually proposes a highly structured, localized solution. He says humanity will survive in small tribal groups that merge permaculture with strict Islamic financial principles.
Okay, we need to dig into how those two things actually merge. Because on the surface, farming and Islamic banking sound like totally separate disciplines.
To understand the merge, you have to look at the mechanics of both. Islamic finance fundamentally prohibits charging interest money cannot make money.
Right.
Every financial transaction must be tied to real, tangible goods or equity. If I lend you money, I can't just sit back and watch my wealth grow passively from your debt. I have to actually invest in the success of your project.
And permaculture is the development of sustainable, self-sufficient agricultural ecosystems.
Exactly. When you remove interest-bearing debt from a local farming community, people are forced to deeply rely on and invest in their neighbor's actual physical survival.
Garrison points to a real-world example of this that he lived through. In the 1970s, he spent time with a hippie rainbow gathering in the woods of Colorado.
I love this detail.
Right. These were temporary, decentralized villages where thousands of people operated completely without conventional money.
They ran free kitchens, bartered goods, and handled conflict locally, completely outside state hierarchies.
Garrison looks back at that Grateful Dead parking lot economy and says, that is the future.
He essentially takes indigenous survival skills and grounds them in the strict justice of Islamic financial law to prevent anyone from hoarding power.
It is the ultimate decentralization. He envisions humanity surviving the 2027 breakdown by returning to these small camps, deeply knowing the people they trade with.
And negotiating life locally without a massive state apparatus to either protect or oppress them.
It's a breathtakingly vast theory. We've gone from the Big Bang to the liver to Colorado permaculture camps.
It really covers everything.
But he actually manages to tie a neat bow on the whole thing by explaining how the three major monotheistic religions fit perfectly into this post-2027 survival plan.
Yeah, he doesn't believe one religion needs to eradicate the others. He thinks humanity's survival depends on a triad.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he assigns a highly specific mechanical function to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, arguing that we need the core genius of all three to prevent society from sliding back into mimetic violence.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that triad. First, Judaism. He calls them the storytellers.
Why is storytelling their specific function?
Historically, Garrison argues that the Jewish tradition, starting with Abraham, introduced the concept of linear time. Before that, ancient humanity was trapped in the cyclical time of the agricultural seasons, endless loops of planting and harvesting.
Oh, that makes sense.
The Jewish genius was providing a narrative art, a distinct beginning, a purposeful journey, and an ultimate destination. To survive in local tribes, humanity needs that overarching story to pull us forward.
Then Christianity. He designates their functional role as the universal friends.
And this mechanically stems from their theology of the divine spark. Their job isn't to govern. Their job is to look at every single person and recognize the Son of God within them.
By doing that, they systematically remove the concept of the enemy, which binds the community together with unconditional love.
Finally, Islam. If Judaism gives the community its narrative direction and Christianity provides the binding love, Islam acts as the enforcers of justice.
Because Garrison points out that love cannot merely be an abstract intellectual feeling. It has to manifest physically.
Islam's role is to ensure that the permaculture's camp doesn't rot from within by enforcing the financial rules, protecting the poor, prohibiting usury, and ensuring resources are shared justly.
They form a perfect, interdependent ecosystem. You need the story so you don't lose hope, you need the friendship so you don't turn on each other, and you need the strict justice so the strong don't exploit the weak.
Without all three acting in harmony, the system breaks down and the passenger mind grabs the steering wheel to build new idols all over again.
This has been one of the most intense, multi-layered deep dives we've ever done. We started with the sheer terror of realizing our conscious minds aren't actually in control.
We looked at how our not-self copies desires and turns everything from Bitcoin to the city of Jerusalem into idols to fight over.
We explored the innocence of the heart acting like a liver, filtering out the world's mess, and we ended up in a 2027 apocalyptic permaculture camp, trading carrots under Islamic financial law.
It is a dense, provocative synthesis that forces you to look at the intersection of your own internal psychology and the global systems we participate in every day.
It really makes me think about my own passenger mind. Like, how often do I panic, try to grab the steering wheel, and defend my own misery, instead of just sitting back and learning from the ride?
I think there is a fascinating modern application to Garrison's ideas that we can leave you with today. Think about René Girard's theory of mimetic desire, the idea that we fight over toys simply because we see someone else wanting them.
Hmm.
Now, project that into the present moment and think about the smartphone in your pocket. The algorithms powering our social media feeds are essentially massive automated machines designed to exploit our passenger minds.
Oh, absolutely.
They scale mimetic desire artificially, feeding us endless images of what other people want, own, and are outraged by. So, look at the desires you hold most strongly right now.
That's a great exercise.
How many of them actually belong to your true self, and how many were simply fed to your passenger mind by an algorithm optimized to keep you fighting over a digital toy?
That is an incredible thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you. Keep observing what your own mind is up to. And most importantly, keep learning. Catch you next time.